Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to the last workshop of the year for Teks. This is Between the I and the Utter, and we'll be looking at Claudia Rankine's book, Citizen. Before we get started, I would like to say that this workshop series was possible in part due to funds from Queen's Council on the Arts New Works Grant. And if you are interested, you can watch the rest of the first iteration of this Teks series on my YouTube page. So let's begin. Also, if you're currently watching this, please do say hello in the chat and comment in the chat as well. So Between the I and the Utter. This was actually is another version of a workshop that I did a couple of years ago for St. John's University's gallery when they did the Citizen exhibition, and it was in collaboration with Queens Public Library, and we did a workshop at the public library. So I decided to come back to this workshop as kind of a coming full circle around. And this is what it became. It was originally Between the I and the Other, but I wanted to change it to the Utter in thinking about sound and breath in Claudia Rankine's work. So before we start looking at Rankine's work, I wanted to talk about double consciousness, which was a term that was coined by W.E.B. Du Bois. I think double consciousness plays a huge part in the work of Citizen, in thinking about how one sees oneself versus how others perceive the self. So let's read a couple of quotes from W. Du Bois's work. And you can find the longer work, Strivings of the Negro People, on the Atlantic.com website. Between me and the other world, there is an unasked question, unasked by some through feelings of delicacy, by others through the difficulty of rightly framing it. All, nevertheless, flutter around it. They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously or compassionately, and then instead of saying directly, "How does it feel to be a problem?" they say, "I know an excellent colored man in my town," or "I fought at Mechanicsville," or do not these Southern outrages make your blood boil? At these I smile, or am interested, or reduced to the boiling to a simmer as the occasion may require. So the real question, how does it feel to be a problem? I answer seldom a word. After the Egyptian and Indian, the Greek and Roman, the Teuton and Mongolian, the Negro is a sort of seventh son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no self-consciousness, but only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this doubled consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife, this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. He does not wish to Africanize America, for America has too much to teach the world, and Africa he does not wish to bleach his Negro blood in a flood of white Americanism, for he believes foolishly perhaps, but fervently, that the Negro blood has yet a message for the world. He simply wishes to make it possible for a man to be both a Negro and an American, without being cursed and spit upon by his fellows, without losing the opportunity of self-development. So as you can see, in Du Bois's contemplation about double consciousness, you see the constant tension and struggle of being a Black person in America, that there's the way one sees oneself, but constantly having to keep in mind the way others see the Black body as well. And I wanted to extend double consciousness to not just about Blackness, but also thinking about the ideas of the social self. There's ways that we see ourselves, right? And then there's ways that others perceive us, and how others perceive us affects our lives on a daily basis and affects how we move and maneuver and negotiate through the world as well. And thinking about citizen, I immediately thought of the 14th Amendment, especially because the 14th Amendment is being debated on right now by the current president. And so what is the 14th Amendment? So the 14th Amendment gave birthright citizenship, right? All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And this amendment was passed after slavery was abolished in America, and it basically gave rights to enslaved Black people in America. But considering that Black people weren't given citizenship rights from the get-go in the birthing of this nation, it always makes Black citizenship not stable, right? It's always in a tenuous situation, right? Because it means because it really makes clear who is a citizen, or who was always seen as a citizen, and whose citizenship had to be included in this idea of inclusion, and who gets to decide who's included and who's not, right? Who is a citizen and who is not, right? Who belongs and who is outside of that belonging, right? Who has the power to name who gets to be a citizen and who is named the citizen, right? And that goes back to laws and legality, right? And bringing back to the idea of double consciousness and the social self, right? There's a way that I see myself, but in reference to laws and legality, that idea that I have of myself may not even count, because the larger social self may be prohibited from my own self-definition, right? So it brings to the question of personhood, right? And who gets to assert that personhood, who gets to self-define, right? So moving on to another way to think about citizen, Rankine uses throughout the book the second person point of view. And this use of the second person point of view goes uh complements W.E.B. Du Bois's um double consciousness, right? This two-ness of being, because the second person isn't the I, right? This subjectivity of the I. It isn't a third person who's an other that's outside of the self. It's a person that is kind of in between, an other who is also a subject, right? And so it creates an intimacy between the person who is speaking and the person who is being addressed, which is usually the reader or the viewer, right? It creates a sense of ambiguity, as you will read in in some of the pieces, that it's not clear who the you is. Is the you the speaker, or is the you the reader or viewer? It also creates a feeling of dissociation or distance between the speaker and the story, right? Instead of saying I, saying you, it's not, again, it's that sense of ambiguity. It's not clear if it's the speaker. So it creates a space for the speaker to be reflective on the story, right? And it also gives the speaker someone to address, or a listener, right? And that creates, again, that sense of intimacy. And also it reinforces the main themes of the work. So your use of the you is kind of a doubleness. It creates an intimacy, but also a dissociation, that kind of ambiguity between these two states of being, the subject as well as the other, right? Who's not a subject, but is being addressed in this kind of far away sense, right? So let's look at a few pieces from Citizen. So the quote above is from one of the pieces in the book. No amount of visibility will alter the ways in which one is perceived. And that, again, the idea of asserting the personhood, that one could be visible and assert themselves and their presence, but that doesn't change how others see them, and how perception affects how we move through society. So this is one of the poems in the book. Certain moments send adrenaline to the heart, dry out the tongue, and clog the lungs. Like thunder, they drown you in sound. No, like lightning, they strike you across the larynx. Cough. After it happened, I was at a loss for words. Haven't you said this yourself? Haven't you said this to a close friend who early in your friendship, when distracted, would call you by the name of her black housekeeper? You assumed you two were the only black people in her life. Eventually, she stopped doing this, though she never acknowledged her slippage, and you never called her on it. Why not? And yet you don't forget. If this were a domestic tragedy, and it might well be, this would be your fatal flaw, your memory, vessel of your feelings. Do you feel hurt because it's the all black people look the same moment, or because you're being confused with another after being so close to this other? And I think this piece right here is very poignant and relates back to the idea of double consciousness, right? The but also the idea of the I versus the other that I was talking about, because of the being at loss for words and trying to find words to respond to how one is being perceived, right? That the white gaze upon her black body takes away her agency and takes away her ability to self-define herself, right? Because she's being confused with another person who is not her, but they're being treated like they're the same, right? Her subjectivity, her selfhood is being taken away through this white gaze and its perception of her body. In the next piece over here, it's the new therapist specializes in trauma counseling. You have only ever spoken on the phone. Her house has a side gate that leads to a back entrance she uses for patients. You walk down a path bordered on both sides with deer grass and rosemary to the gate, which turns out to be locked. At the front door, the bell is a small round disc that you press firmly. When the door finally opens, the woman standing there yells at the top of her lungs, "Get away from my house! What are you doing in my yard?" It's as if a wounded Doberman Pinscher or a German Shepherd has gained the power of speech. And though you back up a few steps, you manage to tell her you have an appointment. You have an appointment, she spits back. Then she pauses. Everything pauses. "Oh," she says, followed by, "Oh, yes, that's right. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. So sorry." So this piece again speaks to how perception affects the interactions between uh, people in society. That the therapist, because they saw this person's Black body, automatically assumed they were criminals, right? They were up to no good, right? They were here to cause harm, and didn't assume they assumed the worst, but didn't assume like, oh, this could be one of my patients, right? This could be one of the people who I'm here to help. But instead, the therapist caused her harm, right? So that doubleness, right? That, oh, you hope to assume that this person will treat you in a respectable manner, will treat you like a human being, but instead they treat you like you're a criminal, like you're a person who's going to cause harm. And by automatically thinking the worst in her patient, right? Because of the way she looks, because she's a Black body, right? She in a way also dehumanizes herself, right? The reference to like, oh, it's as if a wounded Doberman Pinscher or a German Shepherd has gained the power of speech, right? That her own kind of dehumanizing through dehumanizing the speaker. The next piece here, a friend argues that Americans battle between the historical self and the self-self. By this, she means you mostly interact as friends with mutual interests and for the most part compatible personalities. However, sometimes your historical selves, her white self and your Black self, or your white self and her Black self, arrive with the full force of your American positioning. Then you are standing face to face in seconds that wipe the affable smiles right from your mouth. What did you say? Instantaneously, your attachment seems fragile, tenuous, subject to any transgression of your historical self, and your joined personal histories are supposed to save you from your misunderstandings. They usually cause you to understand all too well what is meant. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the difference between the self that you understand as yourself, these intimate interpersonal relationships that don't always include this larger social historical self. There's that how we see ourselves versus how society and historical knowledge and all of that influences those interactions as well. It's like how we talk about racism as a whole, right? There's interpersonal relationships, and then there's larger systematic historical forces that affect how we interact with each other, right? And that color the interactions that we have with each other. Like the speaker says in the poem, your attachment seems fragile, tenuous, subject to any transgression of your historical self. Like any talk of that history, of that larger social self, changes the interactions that we have with anybody. In the next work, we have the rain this morning pours from the gutters, where else it is lost in the trees. You need your glasses to single out what you know is there because doubt is inexorable. You put on your glasses. The trees, their bark, their leaves, even the dead ones are more vibrant, wet. Yes, and it's raining. Each moment is like this before it can be known, categorized as similar to another thing and dismissed. It has to be experienced. It has to be seen. What did he just say? Did she really just say that? Did I hear what I think I heard? Did that just come out of my mouth? His mouth? Your mouth? The moment stinks. Still, you want to stop looking at the trees. You want to walk out and stand among them. And as light as the rain seems, it still rains down on you. I really like this piece because it, going back to the title of this workshop, Between the I and the Other, the I can, what we see and the kind of pureness of vision or a picture or an image, and we'll talk about images in the book later on. Uh, there's there's a lot of variation and meanings that can be held in a single image that doesn't have to be necessarily interpreted to be a certain way, right? It's allowed to just be itself the way it is, the way it looks, right? But the moment the utter, right, comes in, the othering comes in, right? It it ruins that kind of pureness or wholeness of that whole entire image and all the possibilities of what it can be, right? And then there's this constant tension, right, in the othering, in the speaking about this image, right? All the other possibilities get minimized when it's interpreted in a certain way. So then it becomes, what did he just say? Did he really just say that? Did I hear what I think I heard? Did that just come out of my mouth, his mouth, your mouth? Then it starts this kind of conflict because of the interpretation of a pure image, right? And so I think a lot of Citizen is speaking to this idea of the conflict between the pure image of something just being itself versus the the world of interpretations that are often contradictory, conflicting each other, opposing each other. So the next piece. An unsettled feeling keeps the body front and center. The wrong words enter your day like a bad egg in your mouth, and puke run down your blouse, a dampness drawing your stomach in towards your rib cage. When you look around, only you remain. Your own disgust at what you smell, what you feel, doesn't bring you to your feet, not right away, because gathering energy has become its own task, needing its own argument. You are reminded of a conversation you had recently, comparing the merits of sentences constructed implicitly with yes and rather than yes, but. You and your friends decided that yes and attested to a life with no turnoff, no alternative routes. You pull yourself to standing soon enough. The blouse is rinse, it's another week. The blouse is beneath your sweater, against your skin, and you smell good. And again, this piece talks about the the unsettling of the body, right? How the visible body and the pureness of an image can be disrupted easily, right? That yes, there's a way of how you see yourself, but the moment others come in and see and can interpret that image, that whole sense of self can be easily displaced and disrupted, right? And I think it's interesting that Rankin writes about the yes and rather than the yes but, right? That multiplicity of what things can be, and how the way we speak allows for certain ways of being, while the other constructions of the way we speak can stop all alternative ways of being for ourselves, right? So the next piece, sometimes I is supposed to hold what is not there until it is. Then what is comes apart the closer you are to it. This makes the first person a symbol for something, the pronoun barely holding the person together. Someone claimed we should use our skin as wallpaper, knowing we couldn't win. You said I has so much power, it's insane. And you would look past me, all gloved up in a big coat with fancy fur around the collar, and record a self saying you should be scared. The first person can't pull you together. And in this piece, this is one of the first times in the book that Rankin uses I, but the I is not something that the speaker feels like they have, right? And it goes back to what I was saying about who gets to assert personhood, right? That the the subjectivity is always in question because other people can determine who the I is, right? And her writing, then what is comes apart the closer you are to it, right? Like when others are always questioning your personhood, you even question your own personhood, right? The first person can't pull you together, right? Who you are always feels like something that isn't really a part of you because you're not, as W.E.B. Du Bois was saying, you're not allowed to pull those pieces of who you are together because who you see yourself as is always in comparison to how others see you. So it goes back to who gets to use subjectivity and who gets to use I as a way to self-define and as a way to have power, and who doesn't, right? Who can't assert that personhood. In this piece, words work as release, well-oiled doors opening and closing between intention, gesture, a pulse in a neck, the shiftiness of the hands, an unconscious blink, the conversations you have with your eyes translate everything and nothing. What will be needed? What goes unfelt, unsaid? What has been duplicated, redacted here, redacted there, altered to hide or disguise, words encoding the bodies they cover, and despite everything, the body remains. Occasionally, it is interesting to think about the outbursts if you would just cry out. To know what you will sound like is worth noting. This is another piece from the book that I love because it talks about words in relation to embodiment, right? And um, for the speaker in the book, the words that others speak about their body can be dissociating, can take the speaker out of their body. So in this piece, the word they get to claim words as connected to the body, connected to sense, connected to gesture and movement, connected to the way they see things, the way they're interacting with the world, the way they're feeling, the way, basically any way that their body themselves gets to be in the world and be present in the world, right? And so embodying the words and not just using the words to basically displace and oppress others. In the next piece, another friend tells you you have to learn not to absorb the world. She says sometimes she can hear her own voice saying silently to whomever, "You're saying this thing and I'm not going to accept it." Your friend refuses to carry what doesn't belong to her. You take in things you don't want all the time. The second you hear or see some ordinary moment, all its intended targets, all the meanings behind the retreating seconds, as far as you are able to see, come into focus. Hold up. Did you just hear? Did you just say? Did you just see? Did, did you just do that? Then the voice in your head silently tells you to take your foot off your throat because just getting along shouldn't be an ambition. And it goes back, and this piece also again goes back to how words and people's ability to speak how they perceive you can affect how you perceive yourself. And basically asserting your personhood is a constant struggle against how others perceive you and perceive your body. And how do you assert your personhood by being present within your own body, right? And present in your own words. Another thing I wanted to bring up has that Rankin often uses questions through her pieces, and how that form of questioning is in a way an assertion of personhood, the ability to speak back, the ability to question how others are perceiving you. And that kind of throwing back the dissociation and displacement back to the others who want to assume power over your body. In this piece, then flashes a siren, a stretched out roar, and you are not the guy and you still fit the description because there's only one guy who is always the guy fitting the description. Get on the ground now. I must have been speeding. No, you weren't speeding. I wasn't speeding. You didn't do anything wrong. Then why are you pulling me over? Why am I pulled over? Put your hands where they can be seen. Put your hands in the air. Put your hands up. Then you are stretched out on the hood, then cuffed. Get on the ground. And this piece goes back to the other piece that was about being mistaken for somebody else, but how that being mistaken for somebody else and not being allowed your personhood and your individuality can endanger one's life, right? And again, you see the questions that are being used to try and assert that personhood, right? That I'm not that person, that I wasn't doing wrong as you are assuming I was doing, because you think that my black skin automatically assumes that I'm guilty or in the wrong. The next piece, some years there exists a wanting to escape, you floating above your certain ache, still the ache coexists. Call that the imminent you. You are you even before you. Grow into understanding you. Are not anyone worthless, not worth you. Even as your own weight insists you are here, fighting off the weight. of non-existence. And this piece, you can see the dissociation there, and the struggle and the fight to claim the body and claim the self, right? And the way the piece is written, it seems like a struggle between the spirit and the body, right? The immanent you, this other self that you are trying to claim and hold on to with its own weight, right? The weight of your body, the incarnation of who you are. So that constant lifelong struggle to embody the self and be present in the self, even as there's so much social, historical, spiritual situations that kind of take you out of your body. It's that constant struggle to see the self as the self, right? So I wanted to include some of the pictures that are in the book as well. This is one of the works from Glenn Ligon. It's a quote of Zora Neale Hurston when she said, "I do not always feel colored except when I'm against a white background," right? And that speaks to, again, the othering that forces the self to see themselves in a certain way, right? And how subjectivity or the I is crafted not just from how you see yourself, but also how others are perceiving you as well, and how all of that colors your own subjectivity. This is another piece that is from one second. Oh, John Lucas. John Lucas's piece, Male 2 and 1. And it's a series of photographs that are looking at um, different situations in which I guess men are in their kind of private moments or private thoughts, but the way the photographs are placed, they're kind of placed in this kind of window structure, but also looks like bars, right? And the fact that we're looking at these pictures, we're we're as the viewers are perceiving these pictures in a certain way, but despite the fact that these are kind of private moments and thoughts. So again, it's that contrast between the subject and their private moments versus us as the viewer, um, kind of thinking about and perceiving these pictures in a certain way. And so the contrast between the subject and this kind of hybrid social self, and how our perceptions of these pictures also kind of puts them in a kind of uh, imprisonment in a way, right? Because we don't know what's going on necessarily in these moments, but the way we're viewing these subjects creates a certain view. And this is one of the last artworks in the book. And it's from Joseph Mallard William Turner, and it's the slave ship. And then the picture that's on the right is the detail of a fish attacking slave from the slave ship. And the fact that this is what ended the book um, is extremely powerful in thinking of how the self and our idea of the self can easily be disrupted and displaced just by how somebody else regards your humanity. you can be thrown overboard and your life be taken away just because of how somebody else regards you and your sense of self, right? And it really takes away the idea that we have full control over our subjectivity and who we think we are, right? That's always in tension with in a tense relationship with how others perceive us, how others can write about us, how others can speak about us, how others can write into law how they perceive us. And that affects how we move throughout the world. So, in thinking about these poems and the artwork that's in the book, the writing prompt for this workshop is "Who are you?" So I want you to create a piece reflecting on what you means for you, especially in relation and thinking about citizenship, nationhood, or personhood. And if you create a piece, feel free to share it with me via my email or social media. You can find the social media for J Expressions at Twitter, J Express Books, or IG, J Expressions Bookshop. Also, a couple of weeks ago, we had the launch event for Jam Journal. And so you can find out more about Jam Journal at jamjournallit.com. And you can also sign up for J Expressions newsletters at tinyletter.com/jexpressions for more information about what I do and collaborate and possible collaborations that you can do with the work I do. And if you would like to support more of the work, you can also make donations at PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App. I'm accepting donations there. And I thank you all for joining me for the first iteration of Teks. And I look forward to seeing you next year for the next iteration. Thank you, everyone. See you next year.